As anime fans, I think we are sometimes guilty of placing our favourite directors on pedestals, and the biggest example of this has to be Hayao Miyazaki. For many of us, especially in the West, Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli represented the pinnacle of anime filmmaking. The impact that Miyazaki's movies have had on anime and pop culture in general cannot be understated, though what I've come to realise since I started this channel is that, as a person, he is far from perfect. I always knew that he was something of a flawed genius, but the further I dig into his history and his personal life, the more it becomes apparent that he can actually be a massive jerk. In this video, I'm going to discuss 3 separate occasions where Miyazaki's petty and vindictive side came out to try and come to a conclusion about whether or not he's actually a terrible person in real life. In March 2011, an undersea megathrust earthquake occurred in the Pacific Ocean, about 45 miles east of the Oshika Peninsula. With a magnitude of 9.1 on the Richter scale, it was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan and the 4th most powerful earthquake worldwide since records began. It triggered a tsunami with waves travelling at over 430 miles per hour and reaching heights of 130 feet in some places. Over 100 evacuation sites were completely washed away, and to make matters worse, the weather was freezing at the time, with snowfall hindering the rescue efforts. Almost 20,000 people were killed and a further 6,000 were left injured. This was a dark day in Japan's history, and as you can imagine, work ground to a halt around the country as people tried to take stock of the damage and the great loss of life. Ghibli co-founder and head producer Toshio Suzuki decided to temporarily halt the production of From Up on Poppy Hill, the film the studio was working on at the time. 3 days after the earthquake struck, a small group of the film's staff came in for an emergency meeting with Suzuki so they could decide how to proceed. With rolling blackouts across the country and the possibility of aftershocks still very much a concern, they were granted a further 3 days off work. When Miyazaki found out about this, he was furious, flying off the handle in a fiery exchange. Here's what happened. The decision to suspend production on the film was reversed, and the animators working on From Up on Poppy Hill had to come in at night to avoid scheduled daily blackouts. It was a grueling experience for them and tensions were high in the office, but as far as Miyazaki was concerned, this was preferable to moving the release date back a few days. What few people knew at the time was that Miyazaki had quietly started working on his next film just a few months prior to the disaster, drawing up the initial storyboards for The Wind Rises. Ironically, The Wind Rises depicts the events of the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. Like the earthquake of 2011, it caused widespread death and destruction, leaving much of Tokyo in ruins and completely destroying the port city of Yokohama. Miyazaki's film depicts the quake and its aftermath in devastating detail, capturing the sheer terror that people experienced on the ground. He masterfully depicts the human cost of natural disasters, but his lack of compassion when something similar happened in his lifetime is pretty shocking. Also, the fact that he said that anyone who wanted to leave could do so is pretty disingenuous. If you know anything about work culture in Japan, then you'll be aware that seniority is everything. While Miyazaki was technically giving those who wanted to take some time off permission to do so, he knew full well that nobody was going to take him up on that offer so long as he remained in the office. That's exactly what Suzuki meant when he said that telling the staff this would just confuse matters. Sadly, this would not be the last time that Miyazaki would show a shocking lack of respect for the people who helped make Studio Ghibli what it is. If you're a Ghibli fan, then you'll no doubt be aware that Miyazaki has announced his retirement on several occasions over the years, only to change his mind and start working on another movie. That was the case with The Wind Rises, which Miyazaki insisted would be his final film. He was so serious about this that he held a press conference announcing that he was definitely calling it quits this time, and Ghibli's animation department was shut down as a result. This led to 2 Ghibli staff members starting their own studio so they could, in their own words, keep the spirit of Studio Ghibli alive. Studio Ponoc was founded in December 2015 by producer Yoshiaki Nishimura and director Hiromasa Yonebayashi. Yonebayashi joined Ghibli as a young man way back in 1996 and was immediately put to work on Miyazaki's film Princess Mononoke. He went on to do key animation on the likes of Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and Ponyo, taking charge of the latter film's impressive climax sequence. At the age of 37, he became Ghibli's youngest ever director when he helmed Arrietty the Borrower, known as The Secret World of Arrietty overseas. It was a big hit for Ghibli, becoming the highest-grossing film of 2010 in Japan and establishing Yonebayashi as a name to watch in the anime world. He joined forces with Nishimura for his next Ghibli project, 2014's When Marnie Was There, and the 2 men went on a tour together to promote the film. However, by the time they returned to Tokyo, Miyazaki had officially retired and they didn't have a studio to go back to. With no other choice, Nishimura and Yonebayashi decided to strike out on their own, and they wanted their first film to be something that appealed to children, like Ghibli's most successful movies. They chose to adapt Mary Stuart's The Little Broomstick, a classic children's book that Disney almost adapted back in the 1980s. In the film, which they decided to call Mary and the Witch's Flower, the lead character is a clumsy English girl who moves to her great-aunt's rural estate, where she discovers a mysterious flower that grants her the power of a witch for a single evening. In many ways, the story feels more suitable for a Ghibli film than The Wind Rises, and maybe that's what pissed Miyazaki off. When Yonebayashi finished making Mary and the Witch's Flower, he and Nishimura arranged for a special showing at Ghibli HQ so their mentors could be the first ones to see it. Miyazaki, Toshio Suzuki, and Isao Takahata, the 3 co-founders of Studio Ghibli, were the only people invited to the screening, and there are no prizes for guessing which one of them refused to come. Miyazaki's response to the invitation was, "I won't watch it." For Yonebayashi and Nishimura, it must have really stung to hear that one of the 3 men they idolized had no interest in watching the film they made specifically to keep the spirit of Studio Ghibli alive. After all, it's not like Miyazaki had been forced to retire. It was entirely his choice, yet he decided to act like a spoiled brat when someone else dared to make a film that would appeal to the people who were going to miss Ghibli's work. Thankfully, Suzuki and Takahata were far more gracious. Both of them turned up to watch Mary and the Witch's Flower and show their support to Studio Ponoc, which is staffed by several former Ghibli animators. Suzuki was particularly encouraging, telling Yonebayashi and Nishimura that they had achieved exactly what they set out to do. I really can't understand why Miyazaki was so petty about this. He doesn't come off well here, especially seeing as Takahata, who was Miyazaki's mentor when he was an up-and-coming animator, displayed no animosity towards Yonebayashi and Nishimura. Miyazaki would have known full well that the screening at Ghibli was being filmed for a documentary, so his non-attendance feels like it was a way to discredit Mary and the Witch's Flower before its release. My initial thought when I saw this documentary was that maybe Miyazaki planned on making an adaptation of The Little Broomstick himself at some stage. After all, he is known to have an affinity for British children's authors, but when he released a list of his top 50 kids' books of all time, The Little Broomstick wasn't on it, so this doesn't appear to have been the case. For me, this was yet another dick move on Miyazaki's part, though it pales in comparison to the 3rd and final example that I'm going to cover in this video. While Miyazaki's dedication to his craft is admirable, it's come at the cost of his relationship with his family, particularly his eldest son. Goro Miyazaki initially had no interest in following in his father's footsteps as an anime director and was actually a landscape gardener by trade. He designed the rooftop garden that sits on top of the Studio Ghibli building, and he also worked on the Ghibli Museum, becoming its first director. Not long after that, Toshio Suzuki approached Goro about the possibility of directing Ghibli's next project, an adaptation of Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series. He didn't have any experience with directing, but Suzuki wanted someone young to take charge of the film, and who better than the son of Ghibli's main man? There were actually a few other directors in the frame for this job, but they were asking for full creative control over the project, which didn't sit well with Suzuki. He was looking for someone who would be willing to take a more collaborative approach and work alongside some of the studio's veteran animators, and Goro was willing to do just that. It seemed like a good fit, but one person who was not happy with the arrangement was Hayao Miyazaki. He did not want his inexperienced son anywhere near a Ghibli film, though Goro was keen to prove himself and Suzuki ultimately pulled rank. However, it didn't take long for their relationship to break down. Goro opened up about this difficult period in his biography, saying, "He was in complete opposition to me becoming a director, so we had some yelling matches and then he stopped talking to me for some time. In short," he said, "do you even understand what it means for someone with no experience or base to become a director?" He would say, "Do you have any idea how much hard work and suffering I had to put in to get where I am? There's no way someone like you could do it." It was tit for tat at the time, and I ended up saying, "I can do it because I have people by my side who can help." There was the slamming of fists on desks, and we just screamed at one another. Things got so bad that Miyazaki would completely avoid his son when he visited Ghibli's main offices, which are just a short walk from his personal studio. This immaturity was on full display when Goro finished Tales from Earthsea and organised a screening of the film. About 1 hour into the screening, Miyazaki suddenly got up and walked out. The event was being filmed for the documentary 10 Years with Hayao Miyazaki, and when the camera crew caught up with him, he said, After a quick cigarette, Miyazaki returned to the auditorium and watched the rest of the film, though he clearly was not impressed with what he saw. When the movie was done and the lights came up, everyone applauded Goro. Well, everyone except his dad. Instead, Miyazaki just sat there fiddling with his hat, and when the other attendees attempted to chat with him, he went downstairs for another solitary smoke. When the documentary crew caught up with him and asked what he thought of the film, here's what he said. I mean, wow. Even if that's what you're privately thinking, to say that on camera, knowing that your opinion counts more than anyone else, is really not cool. Walking out halfway through the film was bad enough, but to trash Goro like that, knowing full well how much work goes into making an animated feature film, is shameful in my opinion. And that's not the only thing he said. When pressed further about Goro's debut, Miyazaki came out with this: "It's good that he made one movie. With that, he should stop." Now, some people have speculated that the content of the film triggered Miyazaki, and that's what led to his harsh comments. If you've seen Tales from Earthsea, then you'll know that the character Prince Aaron stabs his father to death, which might explain why Miyazaki stormed out and said that you shouldn't make a film based on your emotions. The Ghibli co-founder was an absentee parent during Goro's childhood, spending most of his time working and only coming home once his son had gone to bed. Goro's main exposure to his dad was through his films, so it's not inconceivable that he would use his first film as an opportunity to make a statement about their relationship, or lack of one. Even the author of Earthsea was shocked by this turn of events, which doesn't resemble her books at all. She said, "Aaron's murder of his father in the film is unmotivated, arbitrary. The explanation of it as committed by a dark shadow or alter ego comes late and is not convincing. Why is the boy split in two? We have no clue." Goro clearly wanted to send a message with this scene, but it wasn't aimed directly at his father. During an interview at the Venice Film Festival, he revealed that he was speaking on behalf of Japan's youth. He said, "I do not have much of a relationship with my father. Because of that, I have never felt like killing him. I decided to start with the son murdering the father because I understand that's more or less the feeling of the young Japanese generation. When I worked in the Ghibli Museum, most of the staff there were young people with common problems. I wondered about why that was and tried to come up with reasons, which are reflected in the film. I purposely didn't explain why Aaron stabbed his father because I wanted the audience to think about it and reach a broader idea of why these problems exist." Tensions between father and son flared up again when Goro directed his second Ghibli film, 2011's From Up on Poppy Hill, which Miyazaki wrote the screenplay for. This was the film that Ghibli was working on when the Great East Japan earthquake struck, and Miyazaki insisted the staff come in at night to hit the release deadline. Goro tried his best to keep morale up among the animators, but trying to steer the ship under such difficult circumstances clearly took a toll on his mental health. In truth, the issues began long before the earthquake and subsequent tsunami. After Tales from Earthsea was hammered by the critics, Goro was determined to prove himself as a director, and he was adamant that he wanted no help from his father. Miyazaki insisted that he be allowed to see his son's storyboards, and when Goro refused, he had his old friend Toshio Suzuki intervene. As the film's producer, Suzuki said that he wouldn't release From Up on Poppy Hill unless Goro made the changes that Miyazaki was suggesting, including adding a new scene to the beginning of the movie and making the heroine more lively. These changes were ultimately for the best, as From Up on Poppy Hill went on to be a critically acclaimed hit. However, Goro's relationship with his father was more strained than ever by the time the film came out. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to Miyazaki's relationship with his eldest son, but even so, I think it's fair to say that his reaction at the Earthsea screening was very petty. Does this make him a bad person? Absolutely not. That old trope about separating the art from the artist could be applied here, but I think that would be doing Miyazaki a disservice. After all, this is a man who cares deeply about some of the biggest issues facing humanity. You only need to watch his films to know that he's a pacifist and an environmentalist, though he's openly spoken about these causes during many interviews over the years if you need further proof that his heart is in the right place. I grew up idolizing Miyazaki because his films shaped my childhood, and he will always be one of my favorite filmmakers. Was I shocked to discover that he's kind of a jerk at times? Yes and no. While it was a little surprising to learn that the guy behind these uplifting and thought-provoking anime films is not as beloved by the people inside the industry as he is among fans, all it really did was drive home the fact that he's human. There's arguably nobody better than him at what he does, but at the end of the day, he's just a man, and like the rest of us, he has his flaws. In a strange way, it actually made me respect him all the more. In an age where people tend to hide what they really think and put on a false face for the public, Miyazaki is the rare creator who isn't afraid to put his true self out there, warts and all. As always, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and let me know what you think about these 3 incidents in the comments. Do you think that Miyazaki is a massive jerk who needs to be more respectful to the people who helped put him where he is? Or is he just a grumpy grandpa who pulls no punches? Cheers, guys. I'll see you in the next one.